The Sony XB33 versus the Soundcore Motion...
The XB33 is rubbish!
Soundcore Motion Plus takes on the new Sony XB33 and also the Sony XB43. So we've got this little speaker. It's got no chance. Not only is it a little speaker, it's only 80 quid. And we're talking 150 quid, £200. We're talking basically 1 kilo in weight. Yeah, 1 kilo in weight, 3 kilos in weight. So it's huge and it's heavier. It's going to be so much better than little Soundcore Motion Plus, £80. Do I even need to make the video? Well, yeah, I guess I'll go through the video anyway, just to quickly give you some of the specs of these three speakers. As I said, Sony XB33 came out this year, replacing the Sony XB32, which was never great. In fact, the last XB3 something that was of any note was the Sony XB30. Can the Sony XB33 finally kick its memory into dust? I used to play the XB30 a lot until the Soundcore Motion Plus came along. So for me, Soundcore Motion Plus does beat out the Sony XB30, but Sony XB30 for me remains a classic. And of course, the huge, going to be absolutely fantastic Sony XB43. Now, I have done a previous video on the Sony XB43. You did ask me, can we hear it against the Soundcore Motion Plus? I could talk about me mum and you'd say, can we hear her against the Soundcore Motion? Whatever, I've only got to move. And someone will say, can we hear it against the Soundcore Motion Plus? So these two speakers up against the Soundcore Motion Plus. Just to quickly give you the difference in specs, I already said a kilo, incredible 3 kilos. Soundcore Motion Plus is the oldest of the bunch. Came out last year, February 2019, May 2020. They're both basically 7.4 volts, although it's actually 7.2 volts on the Motion Plus. We do have the smallest battery. So in terms of battery life, I have to tell you quickly, it was amazing. On the Sony XB, the battery life on the XB33 is amazing because it's crap. Yes, this isn't a lie. Playing the Sony XB33 at full volume, I got 30 minutes. But hang on a sec, they say 24 hours battery life. So it used to be, it played, then suddenly went to 20% volume. Now, they're getting clever. Plays at maximum volume for 30 minutes, and then it gradually reduces in volume. So you actually get, in total, when you've set it on maximum, 6 hours, 8 minutes. But on actual maximum volume, it will stay there for 30 minutes. 30 minutes. I couldn't believe it. When I look back on my test tracks, 30 minutes maximum volume, and then gradual, reducing the... Now, I don't know if they're thinking, oh, well, that's a better way of doing it because people complained that suddenly 20% was no good. Or do they think, if we do it gradual, they'll think it's playing for 2 hours at maximum. And then they'll say, we got fantastic battery life. Well, you know, the cat's out of the bag. It's 30 minutes. I did get 2 hours, 20 minutes on the Sony XB43. So in terms of battery, 4,900 milliamps. Don't forget, it'll be 2 times because it's 7.4 volts. 4,900 milliamps, 3,350 milliamps, 2,700 milliamps. I think that's the same battery they've had all the way in from XB30. So in terms of maximum, 30 minutes, 6 hours, 45 minutes, 2 hours, 20 minutes. So already, our £80 speaker, well, if it's only maximum volume at battery life, you've already got your winner. But that does go on into its low battery mode. And we'll play for 6 hours, 40 minutes. So into low volume mode, 6 hours, 40 minutes, maximum volume, 6 hours, 45 minutes. Absolutely crazy. In terms of, I haven't tested this at 66%, but in terms of 66%, which is probably more in line with what you'll be doing, 5 hours, 44 minutes, then low battery mode, 21 hours, 2 hours. I mean, 2 hours at 66%. And then reduces gradual. Total of 13 hours, 40 minutes. We've got tweeters in the little Soundcore Motion Plus. We've got tweeters in the huge XB43. We've got no tweeters in the brand new XB33. They all have decent codecs. So obviously Sony, LDAC, AAC. And we've got aptX in the Soundcore Motion Plus. They are all Bluetooth 5. They are all USB-C charging. And amazingly, still all 3 of these speakers have an auxiliary input. They can all be dropped in water. They're all IPX7, 30 minutes up to a meter of water. and they can all be used as a power bank except for the Soundcore Motion Plus. Now, the sound tests. I am going to use my custom mode. I know not everybody loves my custom mode. I'm not asking you to love my custom mode. I'm saying, for me, when I put my custom, this is what these videos are about from my point of view. So bear that in mind when you complain in the comments that other people have the perfect EQ settings and mine sounds terrible. I still get more people saying they like my EQ settings than don't. But the point is, I'm not asking you to love it. I'm saying these are the EQ settings that I use. And I'm not just basing it on something that suddenly came in my head. I am trying to get a flat frequency response. I'm measuring a flat frequency response, and then I'm adjusting it to my ears, okay? But it's starting from some sort of baseline. I do think they're a lot better than the EQ settings that come already embedded. Most notably, default would be bass up. When it comes to the two Sony speakers, the EQ is a bit weird because it used to sit on top of clear audio, but now you can have clear audio, which is the default setting, or you can have EQ settings, but you can't have them both. It's not consistent either. The changes you make in the EQ tend to be more a balance between bass, mids and treble rather than individually moving those sliders. So I found when you use EQ settings and you get the right settings, it's still very similar. The most notable thing about both these Sony speakers is lack of mids. So when I use my own EQ settings, which will be normally for both of them like +3 bass, +6 mids, +3 on the treble, but it's very close to the default setting clear audio, except that it's going a couple of dB louder. So for me, you can, if you're not using maximum, you can leave it at default, nothing to worry about. What you're actually getting is extra headroom. So for that reason, I'm going to use default in all my comparisons, except for when I get to maximum, I will use the EQ setting. So let's get straight in with that lowish volume test. So this is all about really the Sony XB33. So I'm 50% on the Sony XB33, which means only 29%. So yeah, there's your clue. Loads more headroom on the Soundcore Motion Plus. 29% on the Soundcore Motion Plus. 43% on the XB43. %, on the XB33 means 29% Motion Plus, 43% on the XB43. At these lower volumes, the Motion Plus holds its own in the higher end of the mid bass. -12, -15 means it's 3 dB up in upper bass terms on the XB33. But the XB33 is holding its own for lower bass, 60, -21, -36, 50. It's well ahead of the Motion Plus, which isn't doing low bass. At these low volumes, we're only 29% on the Motion Plus to get the same volume as XB33 at 50%. And the XB43, by far the biggest speaker, just behind the Motion Plus at 90 Hz. Actually, about the same in terms of the bass peak, -13 on the XB43, 75 Hz, -13 on the XB33, and again lower bass, -21, -36. The XB33 at these volumes, around 50% and 43%, actually has the same lower bass as the XB43. The XB33 also having more prominent mids than the XB43 at these volumes. So for me, it's a win for the Sony XB33. It was a bit of a surprise to me. At lowest volumes, I already knew Soundcore Motion Plus with my EQ settings. It doesn't excel at lower volumes. It sounds fine on its own, but when you A/B it, it does tend to sound slightly muddy in comparison to a lot of other speakers. So it's not its greatest moment. Do bear in mind, it's 50% there. It's getting towards its sweet point. We're at low, the low end of the scale, 29%. And around 43%. Not much in it, almost nothing in it in terms of bass. That was a surprise to me. So around 50% volume, XB33 has these forward mids, but the bass, basically the same. 3 kilos at 1 kilo, bear that in mind. Okay, let's try again. 70% on the XB33, which means 60% on the XB43, 43% on the Motion Plus.
Open road while you're wasting time, living parts in life's gonna redefine. Just let go of the bad advice in those parking lines, in those parking lines. You fell so hard, got taken in. Next time we closer to what you did. Can't just do what's already done, ready done. Can't outrun days, good nights, you already know. Yeah, I got that feeling. Blowing short years that are starting to grow. Yeah, I don't believe them. Open road while you're wasting time, living parts in life's gonna redefine. Just let go of the bad advice in those parking lines, in those parking lines. Yeah, got to eyes can see right through what bad intentions do to you. Can't trust them, not a single word, single word. That's you hurt. Bad days, good nights, you already know. Yeah, I got that feeling. Blowing short years that are starting to grow. Yeah, I don't believe them. Open road while you're wasting time, living parts in life's gonna redefine. Just let go of the bad advice in those parking lines, in those parking lines.
We're moving up the volume scale. 70% XB33 means 43% Motion Plus, 60% XB43. Still a lot of headroom then on the Motion Plus. XB43 in real terms would be slightly louder than the XB33 at these volumes. And now the XB33 is behind the Motion Plus in terms of bass all the way. Deep bass 21 and -36. Motion Plus holds sway when it comes to upper bass 15, 15.7. But lower bass 21, 36. The XB33 still has the advantage in the lower bass by 1 to 2 decibels lower bass, and then 1 to 2 decibels behind the upper bass punch of the Motion Plus. Do note the XB33 extends further into the highs than the Motion Plus. Big roll off by the time you hit 15,000 Hz. XB33 still extending, and XB43 going all the way up to 20,000 Hz. XB43 about the same in terms of the 90 Hz, but doing better than the other two speakers when it comes to the mid-low bass. 70 Hz and the deep bass 60 Hz, -18 and -31 is well ahead of the other two speakers. So at these volumes, the Motion Plus, in terms of digging deep bass, albeit it's a huge speaker, but it is digging deeper into that bass. So for me, still XB33, surprisingly, still a winner. Bear in mind, we're not hitting sweet point. A lot of these speakers tend to be sweet spots around 60 to about 75%. That's when the frequency response tends to start flattening out. We got forward mids, going to give it more clarity. It does sound fuller. Is sounding a bit thin, sounding a bit screechy. It's a very safe speaker, the Sony XB43, but in comparison in these ABs, sounding a bit screechy. At these lower volumes for the Motion Plus, sounding a little bit dry. But let's get real. Real world volumes for me, we're already pushing 90% on the XB33. So 90%, 80%, 63%, just starting to hit sweet spot for the Motion Plus at the same time as we're hitting flat out on the XB33.
As I'm a deal, as I would say, oh yeah. Tomorrow we promise today. So listen with the general say, please don't wait for my funeral day. For you to come out and play. Hey shorty, swing my way. Let's live life every day. Don't worry what the world might say. All you gotta do is come out and sing, celebrate. Everybody do the locomotion. Sing, celebrate. Let's party on the ocean. Sing, celebrate. Get this thing in motion. Tomorrow waits and no one celebrate while we alive. Whoa. So much to celebrate in our lives. They say life too short, don't show it to waste. Cause every man of a face is on fate. And I know that you can relate. So let me take you on a great escape. Hey DJ, drop that bass. Let me see some smile and face. Let's do it style and grace. Party the night away. Sing, celebrate. Everybody do the locomotion. Sing, celebrate. Party on the ocean. Sing, celebrate. Get this thing in motion. Tomorrow waits and no one celebrate.
Really pushing the XB33 now. It's at 90%, and the other two, well, the Motion Plus is at 63%, plenty in hand, 80% on the XB43. But still, the XB33 holds up in the lower bass compared to the Motion Plus, minus 30, minus 39, compared to minus 30, minus 36. So 3 dB up for the XB33 at 50 Hz. The Motion Plus well ahead, though, in terms of upper bass slam. Much more punch on the Motion Plus. The XB43 on level terms with the Motion Plus. 2021 for the upper bass. I'm saying upper bass. It's the upper end of the mid bass, of course. And deep bass, 27 minus 33. It's well ahead of the other two speakers by 3 decibels. Now you're talking. Now we're seeing why we call this the budget king. Why we're calling this the pound for pound world champion. £80, £150, £200, 1 kilo, 3 kilos. Hitting real world volumes. Volumes you may well be playing at. And for me, the Soundcore Motion Plus is the winner. Starting to get some reduction in the bass on the XB33 at 90%. Still got those forward mids, but now, because of the reduction in the bass, starting to make it sound a little bit harsh. Still sounding very thin on the XB43, although, you know, it's not sounding terrible. But in AB, you can hear its thin nature. You can hear it's lacking body. At the same time as the Motion Plus, it's sounding nicely balanced. You may not get these in recordings because of the way you're listening. The only thing I can add is that in real life, obviously the Sony XB43, bigger drivers, it sounds bigger. So in terms of, most notably for me, although it's harsh, the vocals will sound just that much bigger. Sounds like a bigger woman singing to you. If you've got a female vocal on both speakers, it'll sound like it's a bigger woman on the XB43, but you'll still have that harshness, that thinness. What is the headroom? Because we're still playing low volumes on the Motion Plus. So as I mentioned before, the only real advantage to using EQ settings in the Sony app now, because you can't have clear audio and EQ settings, is that you'll get extra volume, and you can make up for the reduction in bass as you go towards maximum volume. So for me, on both of them, the mids and the highs 6 and 3, and then I'm pushing the bass to 10 simply to see what it can do. Bear in mind, that's higher than I would go in real life. I'm just trying to see what it will do. Not up to about +7 as much as I go without it sounding starting, you know, to noticeably distort. And in terms of distortion, I am reducing the bass a little bit on the Motion Plus. We are at its limits of what this little speaker, it is a little speaker in comparison, can do. To be fair, you may well want, for most tracks you can leave it with my settings, the bass push right up. But in bass heavy tracks, it will start distorting. And just to be fair, I'm reducing it a little bit, still way bass heavier than it would be if you had it in its default bass up mode. So bear that in mind. I'm going to do default and EQ settings for maximum, and just a little bit of bass reduction, custom settings, maximum volume, the actual headroom on these speakers.
Hold me close in your arms, kiss me slow in the dark. Let's stop time, make it ours. Life's too short, let's leave a mark. We don't know how it goes, how the story unfolds. You say life is not what it seems. We could wake up like it's just a dream. Tell me, baby, will you think about me when I'm gone? Fill my grave with roses, pretty words, and all my songs. I don't think about it often. I don't wanna be forgotten when we say goodbye. Keep my words alive. Let my voice heal your heart. Love my soul like it's art. Why are we worth more after we depart? You say life is not what it seems. We could wake up like it's all just a dream. Tell me, baby, will you think about me when I'm gone? Fill my grave with roses, pretty words, and all my songs. I don't think about it often. I don't wanna be forgotten when we say goodbye. Keep my words alive.
So loudest to quietest, we knew there was plenty of headroom on the Motion Plus against the default modes of the XB33 and the XB43. But when we do push the EQ in those two Sony speakers, the XB43 does pull away, as you would hope, given that it's more than twice the price and more than twice the size of the Motion Plus. In real perceived terms, a decibel and a half louder. You might think that's significant or not, given its £200 price, but that's where we end up. And that's when you push it in its EQ. Peak terms 101 is a decibel up on the Motion Plus. And don't forget, I have reduced the bass settings on the Motion Plus in its custom EQ because we are pushing the limits of that bass. But you can still push that further if you didn't mind a little bit of distortion. It's not terrible, but it is there. In terms of that bass, minus 24, minus 26, the upper bass. Motion Plus does hold on to its upper bass, but low, deep bass, it just can't match it anymore. 76, 50 Hz, minus 25.2, minus 47. We're talking 5 to 6 dB down on the XB43, but the XB43 in its custom EQ mode. However, Motion Plus is still louder than the XB43 in its default mode, although RMS, there's not much in it in terms of LUFS, and the RMS is slightly louder for the XB43 in its default mode. The peak is about a decibel behind the Motion Plus. The bass is about the same at 150 Hz, but the deep bass is still there. That isn't there, even pushing that EQ on the Motion Plus. Again, we're 4 to 5 dB down in the lower bass. We knew the headroom wasn't there already on the XB33. Even pushing the EQ, we're at least 2 decibels down on the other two speakers. And this is the custom EQ, don't forget, on the XB33. So it just doesn't have the headroom in terms of that bass. Minus 26.5 is the same as the 150 Hz on the Motion Plus. 25.3 is also about the same, but 49.5 at 50 Hz. We're now 6 decibels down on the Motion Plus in its EQ setting. So custom versus custom, the Motion Plus has the most headroom in that lower bass. And in default mode, it's a horrendous story. Minus 24.9, we're 8 dB down on the XB43 in its custom mode. About 6.5 decibels down on the Motion Plus in its custom mode. That's huge. That's massive. Bass peak 29.4, 4 dB down on the Motion Plus. So the Motion Plus holding its own against the XB33. Well, more than holding its own. It's louder. It's got the deep bass. And the XB43, as you would hope, more than twice the price, more than twice the size. If you push the EQ in its custom mode, it can pull ahead of the Motion Plus. But only using EQ in its default mode, it's no louder than the Motion Plus. So, you know, it's amazing what this little speaker can do. I'm not saying it's the world's greatest speaker. I'm saying it's clearly the best value you can get. 80 quid. And quite honestly, I mean, it's louder. It sounds decently louder than the Sony XB43 in its default mode. It only goes louder when you start pushing that EQ, and then it's starting to sound a bit, well, you can noticeably hear the distortion actually sounds cleaner on the Motion Plus. And in those settings, it's louder than the default on that. Sony XB33, well, it's good. You know, it was my winner at the lower volumes. There isn't enough headroom. This is 2020, guys. The XB30 was a fantastic speaker, and you know we still don't have headroom or tweeters on the XB33 to the point where 150. This is not 80 quid. This is 150. This is twice the price of the Soundcore Motion Plus. And you know, given the amount of headroom, if you're only ever going to play at low volumes, you might as well get the Max Sound Plus anyway from Tribbit, because that's where it wins out. As soon as you start getting to reasonable volumes, I mean, it sounds okay, but when you can get the Soundcore Motion Plus, you know, well, it's got massively more headroom, even if you push the EQ. The only thing I can say about the XB33, you know, it's not a terrible speaker, just as the XB43 is a really safe speaker. It doesn't sound terrible with anything, but it doesn't sound great. It's just okay, and if you really push the EQ, it will go the loudest. And it will be a bigger sound. It is a bigger speaker. There is more airiness, I would say, with the Sony XB33. This can, when you're pushing it, sound a bit congested. But it's a fuller sound, so you can make some arguments about why you would get the XB33, but there's no argument in terms of the money. If they should be priced the same. This should not be £150. In this day and age, when this is £80, you can't, because you can get 2 of those, and then there's no argument. But if I'm saying to someone, what is the difference between these 2 speakers, why would you get one over the other? Well, up to, you know, around the 90% mark, it does sound quite nice. It does have the forward mids, almost charge 3 like, and it does have a decent bass. It will go lower in that low bass, you know, up to near maximum volume than the Motion Plus, and you can hear it. But you are aware of a lot of the sound you're not getting. This is really well defined, and other than that, there just isn't. You know, you may only listen at moderate volumes. I'm not a headbanger, but the volumes I listen at, I am going past the headroom on that, and I am listening. And that's the thing about the Motion Plus. I can get the volume I want, and I'm not at 100%. You know, I'm at a decent volume, and I still got more to go. With both these speakers, I could be, you know, unless I'm playing it, certainly in default mode, and certainly on the XB33, it's just not going there. I'm at 100%. I'm 95%, and I'm really pushing it. And you can hear the speaker when it's pushed that hard. But I would say there are times there is more airiness. It can sound quite nice. It's not a terrible speaker. It's just a terrible price in this day and age. I mean, a couple of years ago, I don't know. In the pre-Soundcore Motion Plus era, I would have said that's a decent speaker. It sounds really nice, and it beats my Charge 3, and it offers more than the Mono Charge 4. But we have got the Anker Motion Plus. It is £80, and £150 is crazy when I can get 2 of these. Hope you got something out of my video. I did put the Soundcore Motion Plus in. I know you would have asked me about it at some point, and I've done it. Thank you for watching.